to yet another episode of Expert Speak. Today's conversation is going to be a little different, as joining us today is my fellow counselor Neha. Hi Neha, how are you doing?
Hi, Ankita. I guess I'm just trying to hold up, like everyone else around me, figuring out my own little ways to cope with the changes that we are all going through due to this pandemic.
I hear you, and what I find so interesting is that you actually told me how you feel. You did not respond with the regular "I'm fine, thank you." You actually told me how you're doing, and an honest, genuine answer about our feelings is just so rare to find these days. I think we're so conditioned and trained to not talk about our feelings, especially unpleasant ones. And that actually brings me to our discussion today. So take it away, Neha.
Thanks, Ankita. So, our discussion today is about something that we are all aware of in some way, but it's spoken about in a rather hush hush manner: suicide. September 10th is observed as World Suicide Prevention Day, and it can bring out a lot of mixed feelings in all of us. Most importantly, I believe that it brings up a lot of questions in all our minds.
True, true. And I think that's why the need for awareness, right?
Exactly. I think because, on some level, and this is a really sad reality, that we all know of someone who has been impacted by this, either directly or indirectly.
Right.
And yet, we don't quite know how to talk about it. We don't quite understand what are the factors that led up to it. And, should there have been any signs that we should have watched out for? And most importantly, how do we reach out when we ourselves are in need of help?
Right, absolutely. I mean, I do understand that talking about something as sensitive as suicide can be so challenging for all of us. I think it can induce a feeling of fear about a loved one, and it may kind of keep us away from talking about it openly and honestly. And of course, I think the social stigma around mental health and suicide just adds to that conversation.
Yes, absolutely, Ankita. It does. However, you know what? I am noticing some changes in how we view suicide in our country. For instance, it's no longer considered to be illegal in India. And in addition to that, the terminology has also been changed to die by suicide, replacing the earlier terminology of committed suicide, which viewed suicide more as a crime.
Right, right.
And I do believe that, checking the language that we use can go a long way in addressing the feelings that an individual might be going through.
Sure, sure. And that makes me so hopeful because I think it indicates a change in mindset or how we're approaching this entire subject, I think. I mean, look at it this way, it's the fourth leading cause of death in the world according to WHO, and I've also read that more people die of suicide than being casualties of war, terrorist acts, or interpersonal violence combined. And I think that's just all the more reason to discuss its prevention and rehabilitation.
Right, absolutely. I think the toughest part is about identifying whether someone is having suicidal thoughts or is actually considering it.
Yeah.
Suicide is closely linked to depression, and there's a particular form of it, in fact, that's called smiling depression. This is when a person puts on a happy face despite being depressed.
Oh boy, that's tough. I think, and I would be lying if I said that the media didn't portray it flawlessly. I mean, if you are going through a tough time or if you experience a loss in some manner, the next scene in so many movies is the portrayal of a character causing self harm or dying by suicide, which is so unhealthy. And I mean, depression or having self harm thoughts, they don't look a certain way. And it makes it extremely hard to know what's really going on with a person who's contemplating suicide. And I think that's all the more reason why it comes as a shock when this occurs or when this happens. So many people respond with, I didn't even know they were feeling this way, or if I only knew, or it didn't look like this was something that was happening.
Right, I absolutely agree with you, Ankita. So, how do we know? How can you and I and so many other people like us become more aware and mindful or alert about this?
Mm-hmm. I think these are the right questions to ask, right, Neha? That, it is such a vast subject, and I think it helps to just gain some context first before we answer these questions. So, research actually shows that a recent loss, helplessness, grief, some sort of loss of control, any pre existing mental health condition, any family history, even, or presence of multiple stressors that we're unable to deal with tends to increase the risk of this significantly. I think the other thing that comes to mind to set a context is just the amount of support that we have, the amount of coping resources that we have. So there's definitely a difference between perceived support and real support. So, for example, if somebody who has resources available to them might still end up feeling lonely or unsupported. And on the other hand, there may be an individual who does not have, any real source of support in their lives. But both of these examples can lead to suicidal ideations or thoughts. So, for example, you may feel that on the surface someone has it all, they have everything, but you really don't know how they are actually feeling or responding internally.
You're absolutely right, Ankita. Looking into these aspects of an individual's life may give us some insight and direction about how to move forward in supporting them.
Mm-hmm.
And all of this also makes it much more difficult to pinpoint a cause, don't you think?
Sure, sure.
And I'm sure that the causes and triggers are very nuanced for each
Mm-hmm.
individual, which also adds to how sensitively we must deal with anyone who is positively, uh, contemplating it or they
Mm-hmm.
are thinking about it,
Mm-hmm.
and what are the warning signs that we can sensitize ourselves to
Mm-hmm.
if, say, a close friend or a loved one is possibly going through this.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, I think you can definitely begin to see a few signs and changes in behavior, and maybe that's something that you can start to look out for. So, the most common signs are being, of extreme changes in routine, such as your sleeping habits or your eating habits. You're doing either of them a little too much or a little too little. And any form of substance usage, if you see that there's an increased dependency on maybe alcohol, cigarettes, nicotine, in any way, any sort of substances, there's an increase in the dependency. That's another sign. I think another very visible sign is that of lack of proper self-care. We stop taking care of ourselves, of our hygiene. Social withdrawal is another one where we stop talking to people, or we may isolate ourselves, or even a loss of meaning, that things that we found purposeful or meaningful aren't there anymore. It could even be a loss of work, of any failure at work as well. So I think, all of this being said, something that you'll very visibly notice is the way the person interacts with you. If you see that there is, a lot of helplessness and hopelessness in the way that they're talking, or a preoccupation with death, I think it's important to address that with them. It's important to check in with them about how they're doing.
Absolutely. That sounds like a handful, right? And I know it can be a lot to hear, and even when we are feeling that, we should take responsibility, or we have to be the people who are preventing someone to go ahead with these thoughts and actually take action upon them. And I know it can create a lot of pressure on a lot of us, but
Mm-hmm.
that's not completely true, because I think it's a lot to do with just being kind and sensitive, you
Mm-hmm.
know.
Mm-hmm.
And more often than not, a person who's contemplating suicide may want to reach out, but is very unsure of how to express what they are going through
Mm-hmm.
because of the fear of being misunderstood or being judged.
Mm-hmm.
But if there is anything that we need to know through this discussion is that all of the feelings that we are going through, all of these emotions are very, very real.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
hence, these emotions should not be dismissed.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it is here to somewhere understand the importance of getting someone to start talking about their feelings and more importantly, listening to them without judgment.
Mm-hmm. I think you're bringing up great points, Neha, because I think communication is what helps bridge that gap, doesn't it? Um, I think we often feel that the person wants us to fix their problem. So we tend to respond with a very solution oriented manner, saying it's a phase, it happens to everyone, it's all in your head, and the whole lot. But maybe instead of assuming, so the stance I would like us to take is that instead of assuming what the person wants, I think it's always better to ask, how can I help? What would make you feel better at the moment? Or even validating their emotions, that I'm glad you spoke to me about this. Maybe we can figure this out together, or I'm here for support.
That sounds assuring. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like first aid.
Yeah, yeah.
And then a counselor can always step in for structured and professional help for this individual.
Mm-hmm.
There are several helplines as well that you could reach out to for the same.
Sure.
And all of these professional services provide guidance, they provide resources, and even medical intervention at times
Mm-hmm.
to help a person get through these overwhelming emotions that they're going through.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you know what? I think the message that I would like to push through this is that the resources are available,
Yeah.
the help is around you.
Mm.
It's only a matter of recognizing when do you need it, how to access it, and making that effort to reach out.
Sure, sure. And that somehow this eases me a little bit. I think it's so apt, especially in today's context. We're all separated, we're all confined in our homes. The ability to kind of connect with another person has reduced. But I think, we can take steps, we can make an effort, there are ways and means for us to reach out, to take that onus of building and maintaining relationships. I think that's what someone might need, that might be the need of the hour for somebody, and you never know who you might help out. So I think check in. And since September 10th is World Suicide Prevention Day, I think we can all make it our collective goal to, work together to prevent suicide. So stay connected, stay aware, and despite the, distance and separation, I'm sure that there are steps that we can take. So, finally, I would just like to thank you, Neha, for your time and for your insights. This brings us to the end of our podcast. And I think your insights and your thoughts have definitely given us all a lot to think about. So, thank you all for listening. And remember, stay connected, stay safe. Until next time, goodbye.
The views and opinions in this podcast have been expressed by professional counselors. If you or a loved one are dealing with similar issues and are having difficulty coping, please do seek professional help.